Welcome to a special episode of our podcast series by OCBC Global Markets Research and Strategy. This episode celebrates World Environment Day that falls on the 5th of June and Go Green SG taking place from 16 May to 29th June this year. Today we have the privilege of speaking to Melissa, Chair of the Climate Action SG Alliance, also known as CASA. She is also a research fellow and lead at the NUS Centre for Nature-Based Climate Solutions and head of the NUS Sustainability Academy. Thanks, Melissa, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So can we start by sharing with us more about the work you do with CASA and NUS, as well as some interesting CASA initiatives?
Sure. Thanks again for having me. I'm happy to share a little bit more about CASA. And so CASA stands for the Climate Action SG Alliance, and we were started back in 2018. And this was following a roundtable that was hosted by then Senior Minister of State, Dr. Amy Khor. I wasn't there at that meeting. I joined a bit later, but I understand that that meeting was attended by many leading green groups and individuals in Singapore who were seeking more collaboration and coordination across various stakeholder groups in order to champion climate action. They wanted more collaboration in that area. So CASA was formed through a grassroots initiative by Jessica Chiam. She also founded Eco Business, and she served as the first chair of CASA from 2018 to about 2021. And then I took over the reins from her until now. Of course, CASA is an extracurricular activity. We have almost 30 members right now, and all of us volunteer our time with CASA, some as individuals, but more as organizations. So for me, in my day job, I'm a research fellow at the NUS Centre for Nature-Based Climate Solutions. My area of interest is in climate and carbon market policy. So of course, my work in CASA is particularly relevant. And I also head the NUS Sustainability Academy. We run training courses for the Singapore government and industry professionals to upskill them in order for them to participate well in the green economy. And so as I said, CASA's work and my work at NUS is very complementary. CASA has had many interesting initiatives over the last 7 years that we've been around. We've had many interesting initiatives that span across green jobs, green SMEs, climate education, city in nature, energy reset. Some of these terms seem familiar because CASA initiatives were originally formulated as part of the Singapore Green Plan. So the 5 pillars of the Green Plan really inspired our work. One of the memorable initiatives that CASA had, I cannot mention all of them, of course. I'd like to mention 2 of them. One is the Green Jobs Initiative. I think particularly relevant even today. One of our members is Trisha Suresh. She works in LinkedIn. And I remember in 2022, green skills was all the rage. And especially coming out of the COVID pandemic, we did see an uptick in green skills. And LinkedIn had just presented their Global Green Skills Report. And they were very kind to actually present the report in a special session to CASA members. And this was later, the information that was shared was later used by CASA members to support further initiatives to support green jobs, one of which was to create a platform on WhatsApp to help interested individuals discover green jobs, access resources, and explore events. And I'm very happy to see that now this sort of initiatives have proliferated. So you see a lot more of the sustainability professionals groups, not just on WhatsApp, but other platforms like Telegram as well. Another initiative that CASA has undertaken over the years is actually came out of COVID, I would say, because even during the pandemic, when everything was locked down, our team actually kept on meeting. We met quarterly on Zoom, and coming out of COVID, we felt we needed to meet up, right? And this was still when we all had to wear masks, and our members were very, very kind, and they offered us the opportunity to go and visit their premises. And one of which was Sembcorp. They offered us to go and see their floating solar, and we were very happy. In fact, at the time we said, "Oh, we are going overseas." Actually, it's just over a reservoir, but it was very nice to see everybody during that time. And of course, we kept to the safety measures, but it just felt that despite the lockdown, despite the safe distancing, we could feel the sense of hope, right? That CASA members really wanted to get going again. Certainly, I think climate action really took a backseat during a global pandemic, right? Because public health was really important to address. But still, CASA members were very committed to the journey on climate action. And following that floating solar plant, we actually also went to the Mandai Bird Paradise. And I think learning journeys are pretty much a staple. Now, many of our members are asking for these. So yeah, just a little bit about CASA and what we do.
Thanks, Melissa. So, related to your work at NUS, what are some innovative nature-based solutions being explored or implemented in Singapore, and how do they contribute to Singapore's climate goals?
Yeah, okay. Well, Singapore, of course, is a city in nature, right? Or city in a garden, as some people like to call it. Actually, of course, Singapore is part of a wider region of Southeast Asia, and we have really an amazing diversity of natural landscapes from tropical rainforests to coastal wetlands and even a vibrant marine ecosystem. All of these ecosystems, as the name suggests, right, they are nature-based climate solutions. What this means is they can not only sequester and store carbon dioxide, but they also provide a whole host of other benefits such as greening, reducing urban heat. It can also help to reduce flooding. So not only it helps to achieve Singapore's climate targets by potentially reducing our emissions, right, by sequestering carbon, but actually keeps us cooler, and so it may not have to use so much air conditioning in the office or in common areas. Of course, the trees and other sort of plants provide absorbing potential, like for pollutants, and it releases oxygen for us. It can also reduce pollution like noise pollution and minimize all of those. And it, of course, can also support mental health. So one of the examples that one of our colleagues, Dr. Adrian Lu, has championed, together with other colleagues from NUS and together with some of our CASA members from CDL, is a micro forest. It was recently launched in March of this year, where they launched a tropical forest in an urban shopping space. And this is just one of the many examples that encourages greater interest in the natural environment. It helps to enhance Singaporeans and the public's awareness about tree species that they might find in Singapore, but perhaps they may not be so inclined to go and visit the tropical forest. They might be in the shopping mall and they'll just pop into the micro forest next door to experience what a forest feels like. Right? It's better than virtual reality even. And so the micro forest was also created by the NUS researchers and also CDL to study how microforests can reduce urban temperatures, and which is a reality for Singapore, right? We have high amounts of urban heat island effect. And of course, another key co-benefit from having nature-based solutions will be to boost biodiversity. And of course, very underrated benefit of nature-based solutions is ecological resilience. You don't realize how much of our food, water systems rely very heavily on ecosystem services. So those are some of the benefits that I can say that our team at NUS are working on. And we really aim to partner with organizations everywhere across Singapore and even in the region, because we know that we can't deploy all the solutions ourselves.
Zooming into Singapore's climate goals, what are your thoughts on Singapore's progress towards its nationally determined contributions, and looking ahead, what more needs to be done, especially in these uncertain times?
Great. I'm glad you asked that question because Singapore, in fact, just submitted its second nationally determined contribution this February. And the second NDC is one that I find particularly interesting because it finally puts Singapore's emissions on a downward trajectory. So in the past, our emissions trajectory was always going up. So for example, in 2020, we reported around 50 million tons of emissions, and our target for 2030 is 60 million tons. In fact, Singapore will peak earlier at around 64.4 million tons, and then it will plan to come down to 60 in 2030. And so earlier in 2022, Singapore also announced a net zero target by 2050. Now, I know net zero is not zero, but if you take the new NDC, the new NDC is actually to achieve 45 to 50 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2035. So if you were to draw a line from 60 to zero, although we know that net zero is not zero, but if you were to draw a linear curve downwards, you would actually have to meet a certain set of milestones, right, along the way to actually get to zero. So 45 to 50 is actually in line with that line, that downward trajectory. So I would say Singapore's target is ambitious, but of course, the details need to be fleshed out a little bit more. As I mentioned, one thing interesting about it is the first time we have a downwards emissions trajectory, but this is going to be really challenging. And the reason why I say so is we already know that Singapore's existing NDC is a stretch target. It means it's going to be challenging for us to meet. So all the more now we're going downwards, how do we get there, right? So this is the real challenge that we have, because if we were to peak around 64 million tons in 2028, and then expect that, let's say we take the lower bound of 45 million tons in 2035, that means that we have to reduce about 20 million tons, or close to 20 million tons, within 7 years. That is really challenging, extremely challenging. How are we going to do this? So we know that decarbonization has its limits, okay, because our economy relies on burning fossil fuels, driving around, right? People's lifestyles rely on electricity, which we get all from fossil fuels. We are already pursuing as much energy efficiency as we can. Climate vouchers, for instance, helps households to switch to more climate-friendly appliances. So everything that can be done, I assume, is being done. But I don't think we're going to reduce by 20 million tons by just those efforts. So Singapore, of course, is exploring interesting ways such as electricity imports. I think the government has announced that we plan to import around 6 gigawatts by 2035, which is a not insignificant percentage of our actual energy demand, which begs the question about energy security, of course. What happens, for instance, if your neighbors one day are less friendly than they are today, and we might find it challenging to meet those demands. So I think the existing power plants cannot be powered down or decommissioned. We are also exploring international carbon credits. It's an area I'm studying right now. International carbon credits are simply mitigation activities that take place somewhere else, and Singapore will make the effort to procure or buy those units to offset our own emissions. And we expect that that sector is going to grow. It's already growing quite significantly. In fact, Singapore plans to become a carbon services and trading hub. There's no timeline to it, but we are already undertaking a lot of efforts to ensure that we have that hub status and to become a center of excellence. There are other low carbon technologies that we are studying and investing in. And I think these have already been mentioned in the press and multiple times during Committee of Supply debates and speeches. But just to mention it here, these are technologies such as carbon capture, storage, and utilization. So these are beyond the nature-based solutions, right? We actually have to employ technological solutions. We expect CCSU to contribute around 2 million tons per annum by 2030. So this is announced by the Singapore government. We're also pursuing hydrogen and ammonia for various applications. And in fact, in PM Lawrence Wong's budget speech earlier this year, some people may have noticed the very clear mention of nuclear reactors being studied. So we are expecting that maybe Singapore might even deploy small or medium-sized nuclear reactors, provided they are safe and publicly acceptable in the longer term to further decarbonize. And of course, not to mention the green transition, right? So we still have to try because there are multiple pathways to getting to net zero, and the government is really leading the way. In fact, they've published plans for decarbonization in various sectors like aviation, data centers, which of course are very high energy consuming sector, marine and offshore maritime. Jurong Island also is slated to become more sustainable, and in the area of tourism. Of course, Singapore, as I've mentioned earlier, we have a lot of initiatives and grants that companies can access because it's important to finance the green transition, right? Companies are not going to do this at zero cost. In fact, it can be quite costly, right, to pursue these measures. And so, having clear policies like energy efficiency regulations and standards, regulatory reviews, and as I mentioned, support is important. I think one final thing I'll mention about this is the government is also has got new green procurement policies. So moving forward, of course, anyone who wants to tender for government projects will need to have green credentials, right? They will have to disclose, among other things. So I think these are all very good signals that we are on track to meeting our NDC. But I think more certainly can be done. There's always room for doing more. So yeah, I'll stop there.
So, on an individual level and also in the spirit of World Environment Day, what advice would you offer to anyone who aspires to make a positive impact on the environment and engage in climate action?
Yeah, so I've been in this space for about, I would say, 15 years, and I've seen Singapore really move from just starting out in sustainability. I started working when the National Climate Change Secretariat was just formed. It's been a very interesting decade and a half, and I really think that we will continue on that journey. And there are many people who are aspiring to make an impact in this space. But I would say it does take a while, I suppose, to master things and to become what some might term as subject matter experts. And what this requires is really hard work. Just keep reading, keep up with the latest developments. It really boils down to that, right? Getting up early, reading up on the latest, maybe subscribing to newsletters, podcasts to keep up and learn how to communicate effectively with others, right? At the end of the day, people are driven by interest. And if you listen carefully, if you are willing to do that, and what that will end up with is that you are able to better listen to what the other parties are looking for, and then you should be able to communicate better rather than be at odds with one another. And I think being in this interesting world today, where I would say some would say it's increasingly polarized, I think communicating well is particularly important. So I would say that for anyone who wants to make a positive impact, really partner up with people, build bridges, not walls, communicate well, and in order to get things done, keep fighting the good fight, you really will need to learn how to work together and look for new opportunities to collaborate. And so like I said, please just try and find what each other's interests are and listen out for those opportunities. And I'm sure from there, things will bloom.
Thanks, Melissa, for the advice and sharing very useful insights. I hope this chat has allowed the audience to gain some insight into the interesting initiatives from CASA and NUS, such as the Green Jobs Initiative, Singapore's efforts towards its climate goals, and how we can play a part as individuals. Thanks again, Melissa.
Thanks.